Hey everyone, it's Dr. Mark Khan, and this is still Chapter 1, Introduction to Biology. What is life? So by the end of this section, you should be able to identify and describe the properties of life, describe the levels of organization among living things, and then list some examples of different subdisciplines in biology. So we know that biology, anything that ends in ology, means the study of. So biology is the science that studies life. Now, what qualifies something as living versus non-living? We have to ask ourselves, what is life? On the left side of this slide, we see a picture of the Mars rover. It's asking itself, am I alive? Is the dirt alive? And then we see on the right a picture of a really cute baby. And I'm sure the baby, in its many thoughts, asks itself, am I alive? This YouTube link actually goes to a video reporting about possible signs of life on the planet Mars that the Mars rover might have discovered. So if you have some time, make sure you check out that YouTube video. Now, all groups of living organisms share several key characteristics and functions. These are the properties of life. There's order, sensitivity or response to stimuli, the ability to do reproduction, adaptation, to have growth and development, regulation, homeostasis, and energy processing. So these are the properties of life that all living organisms exhibit, and we'll go through each one. So organisms are highly organized structures that consist of one or more cells. And inside each cell, atoms make up molecules. And cells also can contain organic macromolecules, which we'll talk about in Chapter 2. These macromolecules include nucleic acids, proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. A cell is the smallest unit of life, and it is a tiny compartment that is made up of structures called organelles, and we'll talk about cells in another chapter. Organisms have the ability or exhibit sensitivity and respond to stimuli. So they can respond to a diverse amount of stimuli. For example, plants can bend toward a light source. This is known as phototaxis, or they can respond to touch. At the bottom of this slide, we see a specific type of plant called Mimosa pudica. The leaves of this plant will instantly droop and fold when you touch this plant. And then after a few minutes, the plant will then return to its normal state. Another example of this property of life, we have bacteria. Bacteria can move toward or away from certain chemicals, and this is known as chemotaxis. Another property of life is reproduction. Organisms will pass their genetic material, or DNA, to their offspring. We have single-celled organisms, or organisms made up of just one cell, that can duplicate their DNA. Again, DNA is genetic material, and then divide this DNA equally, and then the cell will prepare to divide and form two new cells. In multicellular organisms produce specialized reproductive cells that will form new individuals. So for example, we have an egg and a sperm. These are sex cells that will then produce a zygote and undergo multiple cellular divisions to produce the organism. Another property of life is adaptation. All living organisms exhibit a fit to their environment. A fit meaning they have a specific function, or they are able to adapt to their environment so that they can survive and continue to propagate their species or continue to produce more offspring. So adaptation is a consequence of evolution by natural selection. The famous scientist Charles Darwin wrote a book about this. All adaptations made by organisms will enhance an organism's ability to survive and produce, and this is known as survival of the fittest. So in order to survive, an organism has to adapt to its environment. We, as early man, were able to start walking on two legs. We were able to adapt tools to help us hunt food, to help us gather food, and those with the best characteristics were able to continue to pass on these traits and characteristics to their offspring, and the strongest of these offspring survived. That is what survival of the fittest means. Nature selects the offspring with the best traits that ensure survival of their species. Another characteristic of organisms is growth and development. So organisms grow and develop according to specific instructions coded for them by their genes. So we know that growth is an increase in size by adding cells or cellular material. Now genes that we find in our DNA provide instructions. They direct cellular growth and development. Also will ensure that offspring will exhibit many of the same characteristics as their parents. These are the characteristics that allowed their parents to survive their environment. And we can see by this very cute picture in this slide that although no two of these kittens look alike, they have inherited genes from both parents and share many of the same characteristics. They look so cute that people want to take care of them and bring them home and make sure they live long, happy lives as cats. If I could, I'd adopt all the cats in the world, but I can't. Another characteristic that living things exhibit is regulation. So complex organisms require regulatory mechanisms to coordinate their internal functions. These mechanisms include transport of nutrients, response to stimuli, and coping with environmental stresses. Another very important characteristic of life is homeostasis, or being able to maintain homeostasis. So homeostasis is the process by which organisms maintain internal conditions while the outside environment can vary. So cells do require appropriate conditions such as temperature, set pH, the blood, and other characteristics in order to function properly. So we talked about regulatory mechanisms in the last slide. These regulatory mechanisms are important for maintaining homeostasis, or maintaining that internal environment of the body in order to produce these ideal conditions for these organisms to survive. For example, humans require a constant body temperature within a certain range. Normal body temperature is about 98.6. If, for say, we are in a cold environment and body temperature drops, we have internal mechanisms that will help increase body temperature to allow us to continue to survive within that ideal body temperature. So homeostasis is that internal condition that has to be maintained. It's usually a range of conditions, for example, a range of body temperature that must be maintained in order for the organism to continue living and continue to survive. The last property of life is energy processing. Basically, we have to obtain energy in one form or another in order to maintain life. So we use the word metabolism. Metabolism is the transfer of energy from one form to another. All organisms use a source of energy for their metabolic activities. For example, plants. Plants can capture energy from the sun to convert to chemical energy in food. Or, like us humans, we take energy from our food. So chemical energy can be taken from molecules that are taken in. For example, our food. We have our carbohydrates, our lipids, and our proteins. proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. These are large macromolecules that allow us to use those chemicals to form ATP. ATP is a molecule that stores energy in cells and allows us to perform our functions. So we see a little baby being fed food, and of course, I wish this was me. Every now and then, we'd like to stuff ourselves with pizza and pasta and maybe have a nice glass of wine. So these are all ways that we take in energy coming from our food. So living things are highly organized and structured, and we follow a hierarchy from small to large. So there is a level, or there are different levels of organizations for living things. So first we start off with the smallest and most fundamental unit of matter, which is the atom. An atom consists of a nucleus surrounded by electrons. And atoms will then come together to form molecules. Molecules are made up of atoms in a chemical structure that consists of at least two atoms held together by a chemical bond. Many molecules are biologically important macromolecules. Examples of this include our nucleic acids, our proteins, our lipids, and our carbohydrates. And macromolecules are typically formed by combining smaller units called monomers, and we'll talk about that in the next chapter. An example, we have DNA that contains the instructions for the functioning of the organism that contains it. Now, some cells contain aggregates of macromolecules surrounded by membranes. These are called organelles. Organelles are small structures that exist within cells and perform specialized functions. So we talked about the cell earlier, and we know that the cell is the smallest fundamental unit of structure and functioning in living organisms, and we have single-celled organisms such as prokaryotes, and prokaryotes differ from eukaryotes in that they do not have organelles and they do not have a nuclei surrounded by nuclear membranes, whereas eukaryotes do have membrane-bound organelles and they do have a nuclei. So from cells, we then have tissues. So tissues are cells that combine to make tissues. They have similar functions, they carry out the same function, and these are groups of similar cells carrying out the same function. From tissues, we then have organs. Organs are collections of tissues grouped together based on similar function, and these organs are present in both animals and plants. A collection of organs is an organ system. An organ system is a higher level of organization consisting of functionally related organs. So we have different organ systems in our body. We have the digestive system, and organs of the digestive system. So we know that the stomach and the intestines make up the digestive system. We have the cardiovascular system. Organs within the cardiovascular system include the heart and blood vessels. We have the respiratory system. Our lungs are organs that make up the respiratory system. And then organ systems will then form organisms. An organism is an individual living entity. We have single-celled organisms, again, single-celled organisms such as prokaryotes and eukaryotes, but these are referred to as microorganisms, micro meaning small, so these are small organisms. Collectively, a large group of organisms make up a population. So a population are all individuals of a species living within a specific area. For example, in a park, each person is an organism. Together, all the people make up a population. And then from a population, we have a community. A community is a set of populations inhabiting a particular area. And then from a community, we then have an ecosystem. An ecosystem consists of all living things in a particular area together with non-living or abiotic parts of that environment. So from some examples of abiotic or non-living parts include nitrogen in the soil or rainwater. And then at the highest level of organization, we have the biosphere. So the biosphere is a collection of all ecosystems and represents the zones of life on Earth. These zones include land, water, and then portions of the atmosphere. So this is the hierarchy or the levels of organization of organisms, of all living things and organisms. The science of biology is very broad in scope because there is a tremendous diversity of life on Earth. And this is due to evolution. We know that evolution is the process of gradual change during which new species arise from older species. In Darwin's Origin of the Species, he makes the theory of evolution, and he describes human beings, Homo sapiens, being evolved from an earlier species of mammal, monkeys. In Jurassic Park, we learn that our modern day birds have actually evolved from dinosaurs, and the character Dr. Alan Grant in Jurassic Park makes the argument that all birds have evolved in some way or in some form from dinosaurs, who lived over 65 million years ago. So evolution is the source of the tremendous diversity that we see in life on Earth. In the 18th century, we had a scientist named Carl Linnaeus who organized known species of organisms into a hierarchical taxonomy. This taxonomy has 8 levels in its hierarchy. So he was able to basically organize species into this organization. So we go from the broadest to most specific, or highest to lowest. We start off with domains, and then kingdoms, then phylums, class, order, family, genus, species. There's actually a nice little mnemonic that you can use to help you remember this hierarchy from highest to lowest. So we can say, Dear King Philip came over for good soup. To help you remember, the most broadest of this hierarchy is domain, then goes to kingdoms, then can be organized into phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So, Dear King Philip came over for good soup. It's good when you're starting to kind of remember these things through mnemonic devices. Mnemonic devices, again, are just little things that help you remember tidbits of information. I'm full of mnemonic devices, but hopefully that will help you remember. So here we can see the hierarchy, the taxonomic hierarchy for a dog, from the broadest category, which is the domain, to the most specific, which is the species. So there are 3 different types of domains. We have eukarya, archaea, and bacteria. Eukarya, as we learned before, are organisms that have cells with nuclei. This includes kingdoms, fungi, plants, animals, and several protists. The domain archaea are single-celled organisms without nuclei, which include extremophiles that live in harsh environments. And then bacteria are different groups of single-celled organisms without nuclei. And again, to help you remember the taxonomic hierarchy from broadest to more specific is Dear King Philip came over for good soup. So again, here in this figure, we can see the most broadest identification for a dog which is eukarya, and then we have the more specific categorization for dog that would include dog and wolf. Now, Linnaeus was also known to create the naming system for organisms. So he was the first to name organisms using 2 unique names. This is known as the binomial naming system. When we print these 2 names, both names have to be set in italics. So the first part of this binomial naming system is the genus name. And the genus name is capitalized. The second part of this name is the species name. And this is all in lowercase. So for example, we human beings, we are known as Homo sapiens. So our genus name is Homo, and then our species name is sapiens. And you can see that it's in italics, the genus name being capitalized and the species name in lowercase. Now, the scope of biology contains many branches and subdisciplines. For example, we have molecular biology. Molecular biology studies biological processes at the molecular level, and this includes interactions among molecules such as DNA, RNA, and proteins, as well as the way that these molecules are regulated. Microbiology is the study of the structure and function of microorganisms. It's a broad branch itself, and it depends, of course, on the subject of study. Within microbiology, you have microbial physiologists, ecologists, and geneticists. Another field of biological study is neurobiology. So neurobiology studies the biology of the nervous system, and although it is considered a branch of biology, it is also recognized as an interdisciplinary field of study known as neuroscience. And then we have paleontology. This is another branch of biology that uses fossils to study life's history. I remember being young, my brother wanted to be a paleontologist because he loved dinosaurs and wanted to study dinosaurs and knew all about the different types of dinosaurs and would watch tons of shows about people finding fossils and going on archaeological digs to find dinosaur bones and such. And when Jurassic Park came out, it was definitely one of his more favorite movies. Another branch of biology, we have zoology and botany. So zoology and botany are the study of animals and plants respectively. Biologists can also specialize as biotechnologists, ecologists, and physiologists. Ecologists study the interactions of organisms in their environments. Biotechnologists apply the knowledge of biology to create useful products. Physiologists study the workings of cells, tissues, and organs, how things work. So this is just a small sample of the different branches of biological study, and hopefully this class will help kind of guide and direct you to your future career path. Okay, so that is Chapter 1, What is Life, and the different branches of biological study.